Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the 19th chapter of the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam, first canto. Chapter is entitled The Appearance of Shukadeva Goswami. And we are reading today text number 39 and text number 40, which is the final verses of this chapter. (38, 39 and 40). Gotcha. 1:19, 38. Yachrotavyam mato japyam Yatkartavyam nirvi prabho Smartavyam bhajaniyam va Bruhi yadva viparyayam Yachrotavyam mato japyam Yatkartavyam nirvi prabho Smartavyam bhajaniyam va Bruhi yadva viparyayam Yachrotavyam ato japyam Yatkartavyam nirvi prabho Smartavyam bhajaniyam va Bruhi yadva viparyayam Yachrotavyam mato japyam Yatkartavyam nirvi prabho Smartavyam bhajaniyam va Bruhi yadva viparyayam Yachrotavyam mato japyam Yatkartavyam nirvi prabho Smartavyam bhajaniyam va Bruhi yadva viparyayam Yat whatever Shrotavyam worth hearing Ato thereof Japyam chanted Yat what also Kartavyam executed Nribi by the people in general Prabho O Master Smartavyam that which is remembered Bhajaniyam worshipable Va either Bruhi please explain Yadva what it may be Viparyayam against the principle please let me know what the man should hear chant remember and worship and also what he should not do. Please explain all this to me. Nunam bhagavato brahman griheshu grihamedinam na lakshate yavastavyam api gauto hanam kvachit. O powerful Brahman, it is said that you hardly stay in the houses of men long enough to milk a cow. Purport. Saints and sages in the renounced order of life go to the houses of the householders at the time they milk the cows, early in the morning, and ask some quantity of milk for subsistence. A pound of milk fresh from the milk bag of a cow is sufficient to feed an adult with all vitamin values, and therefore saints and sages live only on milk. Even the poorest of the householders keep at least 10 cows, each delivering 12 to 20 quarts of milk, and therefore no one hesitates to spare a few pounds of milk for the mendicants. It is the duty of householders to maintain the saints and sages, like the children. So a saint like Shukadeva Goswami would hardly stay at the house of a householder for more than 5 minutes in the morning. In other words, such saints are very rarely seen in the houses of householders, and Maharaj Parikshit therefore prayed to him to instruct him as soon as possible. The householders also should be intelligent enough to get some transcendental information from visiting sages. The householder should not foolishly ask a saint to deliver what is available in the market. That should be the reciprocal relation between the saints and the householders. Text 40. Suto vacha evam abhashita prishta sarakyash lakshnaya gira praja bhashata dharmogya bhagavan bhadarayani. Shri Suta Goswami said, the king thus spoke and questioned the sage, using sweet language. Then the great and powerful personality, the son of Vyasadeva, who knew the principles of religion, began his reply. And thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport of the first canto, the 19th chapter of the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam, titled The Appearance of Shukadeva Goswami, and thus also ends the first canto. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmritam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaguna Ragunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitangscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshware Vrishabhana Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanshakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. O powerful Brahman, it is said that you hardly stay in the houses of men long enough to milk a cow. We see that in general, the saintly people, it's actually not easy to get their association. And why is that? Because saintly people are very careful. The sages are very careful because wherever people congregate and live, as we see in the householders, means normal people who have their normal lives. Normal life is very complicated because in general what we would see is that whenever people get together and they live together, then so much drama inevitably unfolds between them. As people stay together for a while, it's inevitable that some history develops, So all kinds of emotions and baggage come as a result. Someone does this, someone does that, someone said this, someone said that. And in this way, more and more the conditioned soul becomes entangled in all these things which are ultimately very insignificant. But the problem with the conditioned soul is that even though things are insignificant, he still becomes attached to these things. So just like a child, for example, we see a child, if he gets a toy and you take the toy away from him, he will start crying very severely. He will start screaming and he will become so upset. So even though the thing is insignificant, it's just a little toy, but the child's attachment is very strong, and therefore the child's experience is still very intense, because the child's attachment is projected now onto this toy. So similarly, the living being, the conditioned souls, they become so attached to these insignificant things and so affected by these things. But it is still very intense, because they are also spiritual beings. They also have the power of consciousness, and there's nothing more powerful than consciousness to influence other consciousness. And therefore the saints and sages, they are careful. They are careful to get involved in the lives of conditioned souls, because then you also become affected. We see in the 4th canto of the Bhagavatam, Dhruva Maharaj, when his brother was killed by the Yakshas, when projected in the Hatsha, when Dhruva Maharaj's brother was killed by the Yakshas. So then we see that Dhruva, he went there, according to the duty of a king, he had to go there to, one could say, pay retribution for the death of his brother, because one cannot simply kill the brother of the king and then there has to be no reaction, there has to be some retaliation. So Dhruva went, but then he got carried away and he started to kill the Yakshas by the millions. And it was became a big slaughter. And then at that point, Kuvera and Swayambhuva Manu, they appeared before him and they tried to pacify Dhruva, explaining to him that what you're doing now is not proper. And in there is a very nice sequence of instructions on how Swayambhuva explains to him that the concept of enmity, friends and enmities, that is actually what keeps people bound in this world. This deep attachment that we have to who we consider our friends and who we consider our enemies. And in this way, we have this whole idea of how we like someone or we don't like someone. But it is so superfluous because it can change so quickly. One insignificant thing happens and then, oh no, I don't like this person anymore. And how we would like other people, but then how deeply do we like them? We think, no, this is my real deep friend. But how deep is that friendship? Because at any moment it can change, like it has changed for so many other people. So therefore, the concept of friends and enemies is just something that is pasted over the conditioned soul and keeps us bound in this world, because it absorbs so much of our emotions, gets thrown into these things. So much of ourselves invested in these things. So that is why in the ordinary course of social interaction, entanglement simply increases more and more as we become absorbed in these things. And therefore, household life is very dangerous. To have an ordinary, normal, secular life, one becomes completely engrossed in these things which are ultimately just temporary, fleeting experiences. And therefore we see, one of the reasons is that death is built into this world. So that every now and again you can stop it. Just, my God, it gets too much, isn't it? All this history, all this stuff, all these things that build up. And then every now and again, then death comes. So then Krishna, he stops it. And then at least for a little bit you erase, like you format your computer. You just erase many of those memories and these unnecessary things, and you start fresh again. Otherwise it becomes too much. It will become impossible to get freed from it. And then you start again a little fresher, with a clean slate. No history, no memories of what has happened before and who has done this to you or that to you. And then you try again to somehow figure out what's happening in this world. But the saints and sages, they stay aloof from that. Because in Kali Yuga especially, very difficult. Because previously, the sages and the saints, they could go to the forest. That's what we see. That's why India was such a powerful place. India has always been such a refuge for saintly people. Prabhupada said, for example, that one of the reasons is India has a tropical climate. So therefore people can live very simple in India, because you don't need any kind of heating in the winter. Even if it is very cold, you can live outside, no problem. It's cold, but you will survive, you won't die. Here we see in the Western world, even the poorest people here have to have central heating, some form of heating in the building, otherwise they will die. So very complicated to survive in these other places, whereas in a tropical climate it's much easier. And also in the tropical climates there were forests. So the sages and saints, they could just take their exit from the craziness of society, take a step back, go to the forest, and in that way become much more peaceful and have the opportunity to practice spiritual life without all this unnecessary nonsense and useless emotional experiences that are there that captivate so many of conditioned souls. But the problem is nowadays the forests have disappeared. No more forest. You can't go to the forest anymore. The forests are there, but it's all state-controlled forest. And you're not allowed to stay there anymore. If they catch you with a tent there, they'll catch you and they'll take you back. It's not allowed. And even if you go there, the human body is not able to survive anymore in that condition. We need our vitamins and we need so many other things to survive. Not possible anymore to just survive off roots and fruits. We'll just die very quickly because the human body is not so strong anymore. So no one can run away now from society. Society is everywhere. It's everywhere. And it is just now very difficult in Kali Yuga. And Kali Yuga is also known as the age of quarrel and hypocrisy, because although it's always a law in the material world that social intercourse will sometimes lead to some quarrel, in Kali Yuga it is very quickly. For insignificant things, great quarrels arise, great fights arise between, even for very things that are so small, so tiny, so insignificant, but it can cause so much rupture and friction. So that is Kali Yuga. Because in Kali Yuga also living beings, they become crooked. Human society becomes crooked. Means that in general people become so cowardly that they lose the ability to just speak about what is bothering them. Just go to someone and sit down with them and tell them straight, listen, this is a problem, can we discuss it? But in Kali Yuga we don't do it. We are too cowardly, somehow or other. So what we do is we vent. We speak with other people about the issues that we have about other people. And in that way we take all that emotional energy and we dump it onto someone else. But you will also see how it's interesting when you explain to someone else what your problem is with another person, how it then generally becomes much different. Because this other person, if you would tell another person what's the issue, and the other person is there in person, then you're much more objective. And then you have to be very honest, because this person knows what happened. And then you cannot just say, oh, this person is like this and this. So therefore in Kali Yuga, what should we do? We rile one another up. You have an issue with someone, but too cowardly to discuss it with them. Then you go to your friend and you complain to your friend about them. And then when you complain to your friend, you can just let your emotions fully go. And you can just really just get into it. And your friend just says, yes, no, that is true. It's so horrible what this person has done. And in this way, we try to deal with the situation. It doesn't really help. So we see that one of the qualities of the Vaishnava is arjavam, simplicity. Prabhupada translated as simplicity, also translated as straightforwardness, just to be straightforward. But in Kali Yuga the problem is that by nature we are so disrespectful. So then if we try to be straightforward, then we cause so much offenses. Because we lose the ability to just speak to people honestly, without offending them. So therefore we cannot now be straightforward. Because if we're straightforward, we will be offensive. So what a quandary. So therefore, so much things stay bottled up within us. And because it stays bottled up within us, at a certain point it will burst out. It will explode. And then when it explodes, then there is a fight. Then there is a big quarrel. Just like if you think about in Ayurveda, if you get a fever, for example, a fever is not just something that happens, yesterday you did something and then you get a fever. No, it comes due to the continued breaking of certain principles of health. So you continually eat bad things, but little bit at a time. And in that way the heat in the body increases. And every day you eat these things. Now it's the summer season, so for example there's certain things you shouldn't eat. It causes heat in the body. And because it's not cold, it means there's no way for the body to lose this heat, because it's outside also hot. So now you eat more things that are heating, so you cause more heat internally in the body, and the temperature around you is never enough to dissipate that heat, so the heat builds up within the body. So it builds up day by day, and then one day there's just too much heat, and then the body has to let it go, and then you get a fever, and then it just burns up all these things. So similarly, that's also how it goes in social interaction. You have these tiny infractions that build up, all this pent up emotional energy. It comes, and then one day it just has to all come out, and then there's a big explosion. And everything comes out. So, but the problem with these things is, my God, how much energy does it not take? Huh? So much energy, so much distracting us from what is actually important. But nowhere to run, that is the difficulty. So to try to run away from these things, that also won't work. Because wherever you run, it will just happen again. You can even run to another temple, but then the same thing will happen. And even if you move, whether you are living in the temple or living outside, it's the same thing. Even now living in the temple is not so much different. It's not the forest, isn't it? The same thing is happening. So nowhere to run away from this reality. So therefore, what is our saving grace in Kali Yuga? Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he didn't come here to tell people to go to the forest. He came to tell people to try and spread Krishna consciousness. There actually, on his order, even though no one is qualified, but on his order, he gives people something to do, something important to do. And it is interesting that it is on that instruction of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that is the only way by which one can escape the ocean of faults that is there in Kali Yuga. Sannyas, it is explained that sannyas is not allowed even in Kali Yuga. 5 things that are not allowed. Sannyas, the horse sacrifices or animal sacrifices, begetting children in the womb of your brother's wife, which used to be an allowed thing. Sometimes if your brother is impotent, then you can have someone else impregnate your wife, but it's not allowed in Kali Yuga because it's too complicated, we can't deal with that kind of stuff. What are the other things? There's a few other things, you remember? Few things that are explained to be not allowed in Kali Yuga. So even sannyas there on the list, it's not allowed on that list. But then it's explained, so Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was making people sannyasis, but in a different way. He made people sannyasis not to send them to the forest and renounce life in that way, but people who can then dedicate their full energy towards contributing to the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So it is in this preaching that ultimately it is possible to get some kind of an escape from the pressure that is there in contaminated secular life, contaminated household life, or the contaminated social experiences that abound so much. And it is that what we have to always keep in mind. And also then, when we try to help other people, to understand that there's a limit to how much we can help people by trying to change them. There's a limit, because it's difficult to change. But we see that somehow, it is by somehow engaging people in the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that we have our faith that in there some kind of transformation can take place, some kind of change can take place. And that is what we then simply try to do. Not that we ourselves will go into so much into this mood of trying to transform people or tell people how they should think, tell people how they should change. But we simply try to give people the opportunity to also participate in spreading Krishna consciousness. And therefore, as that energy starts to go out, there is this great release. There we immediately start to understand that what is significant and what is not significant. And we start to become much more distant from all these insignificant things that can somehow seem so big in our lives. So in that way, we will see how that also makes it possible for us on a more personal basis to take properly the instructions of the saintly people. Because that is also the difficulty with saintly people, is that they're oftentimes taken for granted by householders, and therefore they don't stay in one place too long. They keep moving so that they also don't become entangled, and people also don't start to entangle them in their social affairs. But we will see now in the second canto how Sukadeva Goswami starts to give his instructions. So very powerful. Now finally we have had the whole build up to understanding Maharaj Parikshit's situation. We've had the appearance of Sukadeva Goswami. He has entered the assembly and he will sit down now. And finally now he will have the opportunity to speak to Maharaj Parikshit. And very interesting how he was staying with Maharaj Parikshit for 7 days and 7 nights. So very pure atmosphere that is reigning there, that made him willing to stay there and speak Krishna consciousness, speak Krishna Katha. And because he knew that there it is safe. At least if the people are speaking Krishna Katha, then there is no risk of contamination, no risk of becoming endangered by any entanglement. And the moment that the king died, then Sukadeva Goswami again left. So coming and going according to his own sweet will. But that is the prerogative only of the great saintly people. For us who are fully enmeshed, fully entangled in life, fully entangled in the material energy. And here we see, for example, saints, yes, the householders, the duties of the householders. But in Kali Yuga, everyone is a householder. Everyone is a Griya Vrata. No one has the ability to not be involved or entangled in the natural course of social intercourse. So we are all in the same boat, and we are all just trying our best to stay on the transcendental platform. And this platform, we all have to figure out a way how we will do that, and also understand that there are different ways that people can do it. It's not that preaching is stereotyped, that there's only one way to do it. But the principle is that energy has to go out. The energy has to go out to other people. And why? How? On the order of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That is important to remember. We can do it because Lord Chaitanya asked us to do it. So our personal qualification is not actually relevant in that regard. And it is not that we do it for our own pleasure or for our own happiness, but we do it for our own survival. And that is nice. If you understand that you do something for your own survival, then your determination also becomes a little stronger, because then you realize that there is no alternative. So that is an important step in in making that connection with Lord Chaitanya's movement, is to understand that the imperative to somehow give some of your energy to help make other people Krishna conscious is good for you and good for everyone. And as Prabhupada says, that is the essence of this movement. That is the actual purpose of why we're doing all these different things. So always important to be connected to the essence. Okay, let's hear if there are any questions or any comments or anything that has been said today. Yes.
Thank you so much for this class. So, Maharaj Parikshit, he had opportunities to approach his spiritual master and speak with him, right? Even though he approached him before, but what if there is no chance to approach his spiritual master? Is there a connection?
Any spiritual master.
I mean, your spiritual master. Is there still a chance that there is still a connection?
Well, yes, because the spiritual master is the representative of Krishna. And Krishna is always accessible. And Krishna is the one that ultimately makes himself accessible in these various forms. So, Krishna always has the ability to appear to everyone. So therefore we can theoretically say, oh, but it's not always possible to maybe meet the spiritual master, do this, that. No, but it is not true, because Krishna is behind everything. So it is always possible. It's always possible. And it is clear that it is depending on the sincerity of the individual that Krishna will appear to him. And we see that that principle stays the same for us, even once we have a spiritual master. Our access to our spiritual master is always dependent on us maintaining a proper state of consciousness. That is our responsibility. So if we maintain a proper state of consciousness, then Krishna will be able to appear to us in various forms, oftentimes in the form of the spiritual master. But we see that the spiritual master even is not always there. One day he will also leave the world, and then what will happen? Is everything then over? No. Then we have to maintain our connection with our spiritual master and with Krishna by understanding that it was Krishna. Krishna was the person that we were connecting to. So, but at the same time to understand that it is not something that one can claim or be entitled to. The biggest danger in Krishna consciousness and the biggest danger in this movement is that when you stay around too long, you start to develop a sense of entitlement. When you think that you are entitled to something. Oh, I have given so many years, therefore I am entitled to this. I have served my spiritual master for so many years, so therefore he has to give me this. So this sense of entitlement is the greatest poison in spiritual life. And it basically overshadows one's sincerity. And there it makes it impossible for one to be sincere. Because sincerity is always based on the voluntary desire of the disciple to do whatever is required from Krishna. That is what it means to be sincere. It means you always stay willing to understand that I have to do something for my spiritual master. That is my responsibility, and I have to do whatever it is that he wants me to do. Then one is sincere. But the moment one is entitled, then one thinks, but I've already done it. I've already done so much. So therefore I don't have to do anything now. So then immediately what does that mean? It means then one is not sincere, because one is not now willing, one loses that willingness. So therefore this entitlement is a tricky thing in spiritual life. And that is actually what will block us from getting access to our spiritual master. And then even if your spiritual master is on the planet, then somehow it won't work. Even if you meet your spiritual master and you sit down with him and you have the opportunity to explain to him everything that is troubling you or ask him your questions, even then you won't be able to listen to what the spiritual master is saying because your consciousness is not receptive. So therefore the relationship with the spiritual master it can never be thwarted by material obstacles. It's never that we think, oh, my spiritual master is too busy, he doesn't have enough time, he's too far away, all these things are all material obstacles, and they're insignificant. That is not the real obstacle, because Krishna can overcome all these obstacles. The real obstacle is in always trying to stay properly attuned, to have the proper state of mind, and then one will always have access to the spiritual master's desire and instructions, and that is our responsibility. And that we do by maintaining the instructions that the spiritual master gives us, but in always trying to stay open to Krishna's instructions and Krishna's desire. So this is the difficult thing in spiritual life. And that is the mystery also. And that's why Prabhupada said it's very simple, but it is also not very easy. And we have to try again and again to do that, and to learn our lessons. And Krishna was always trying to teach us. And therefore we see that the real events in our life, at least for the devotee, I was also reading the 6th canto, reading this discussion between the Yamadutas and Yamaraj after they have been thwarted when they tried to arrest Ajamil. And then the Yamadutas were very upset because they always thought that Yamaraj was the ruler of this universe, that his desire was completely supreme. Because they could see that who can stop death, and who can stop the punishment that is inflicted upon us after death. But they were stopped by the Vishnudutas. And then Yamaraj explains how the devotees, they are totally out of control of Yamaraj and the Yamadutas. The Yamadutas have no dominion or no control over the devotees. And then Prabhupada says there in the Prabhupada very nicely, he says how material suffering or material difficulties is not meant for the devotees. It's not meant, there's nothing to do with the devotees. because the devotees don't need it anymore. But therefore we understand that whatever happens to the devotee is not Yamarash, it's not the Yamadutas, but it is Krishna. It is Krishna that does things to us. And therefore it is trying to always learn the lessons, as you said also in your class yesterday, that question of asking, what is it that Krishna wants to teach me? So that is how we maintain that connection with the spiritual master. So very important for us to understand this principle. Otherwise we can sometimes get into anxiety that somehow I will miss the opportunity to connect to my spiritual master due to some physical obstruction, due to not having enough time or whatever. And then we get a little in anxiety because these things are out of our control, you know. But there's no need for that anxiety. Our only anxiety should be that we stay a sincere disciple, and then everything else, then all these other external obstacles, they cannot really, it will be overcome by Krishna's mercy. Okay? Any other questions? Yes, Paranta.
One of the viewers has a question. As devotees, is it ever justified to be in a heated argument with another devotee? Suppressing certain feelings seems like it's kind of impersonal. Or should we always do our best to avoid confrontation?
No. To always avoid confrontation is not, we try our best, but it's not always possible. And confrontation and conflict is not always necessarily bad. But just like anything in this world, it has to happen within a certain mode of nature. So, you know, and generally we would see that harmony is very important in spiritual life, because whenever there is disharmony, it causes agitation in the mind, which will make it more difficult to think about Krishna and to serve Krishna. But in order to create harmony or peace, we sometimes have to have some, not confrontation necessarily, but we sometimes have to confront issues. You know, that has to sometimes be there. You have to sometimes confront issues. And in general we see therefore that it is by culture. Culture is supposed to help us to have opportunities to confront issues in a nice way. Therefore we see it is important to regularly, like say in a temple setup, we regularly have to have some kind of meetings, you know, in which you can discuss things that come up. See, because then everybody comes together and then you can discuss things. There's an opportunity, a forum for things to be discussed. If there is no culture that allows things to be discussed, then things will build up and build up and build up until one day, boom. We see also there's a difference between discussing things in the heat of the moment or in a cooler situation afterwards. You know, like say if you run a restaurant, then in the heat of the moment while the restaurant is going, people are cooking and people are doing this, then you know, if you then have to address certain issues, there's a lot of passion, because it's right now things are happening. But if you address those same issues, you know, once the restaurant is closed, everything is done for the day, you sit, then it's much cooler. So therefore, it is not that to avoid conflict, we try our best to confront issues in the mode of goodness. So trying as much to have as much as possible a setting that is conducive for proper mediation of certain situations. So yes, to suppress things is useless, it doesn't work. It's actually a form of ignorance. So suppression is an ignorance. It means that you try to just ignore the situation and you think it will just go away. But then it doesn't. That suppression, that same ignorance that leads to the suppression at a certain point will lead into violence when you cannot suppress it anymore. So you see the two are very much related. Ignorance builds up and then it becomes aggressive because one has not dealt with the situation. But then passion also becomes difficult, because in passion you are simply thinking about your own benefit. And then if you have two people that are very much in passion, trying to confront an issue, it's also difficult to get to a solution, because no one is willing to budge. They're just thinking about what I want and how it should be. But the Vaishnava is supposed to be transcendental to these lower modes of nature. So the Vaishnava, he tries to do things in the mode of goodness, and then also in the mode of transcendence. So in the mode of goodness, what manifests in the mode of goodness? In the mode of goodness, one seeks to understand the other person also. Doesn't mean that one agrees that they are correct. You see, to understand another person doesn't mean that you accept that they are correct. It just means you understand where they're coming from. So you can do that sometimes. Someone comes and there's a little... You try your best to understand what this person's situation is. And then you have a better grip of the situation. And then based on that, you make your decision. So this ability to try to understand other people is very important. And that is part of the mode of goodness, because the mode of goodness is all about the illumination that comes from knowledge. So if there's a conflict with a person, say you have people that someone is very aggressive, but then you try to understand, why are they like that? And then you see, well, I can see actually no, this person is in a very uncomfortable situation because of this and that and whatever. And the more you understand a person's situation, the much easier it is to properly deal with them. So that is the mode of goodness. And what is the mode of transcendence? What is the Vaishnava manifestation? Something that is beyond the mode of goodness is forgiveness. That is actually a transcendental quality. And it is not the same as ignorance. It is not the same as just ignoring the situation. That is not forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't mean you just let it go. Forgiveness doesn't mean you just ignore it. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that is not so easy. It's not just as easy as ignoring a situation in the name of being a devotee and saying that, oh no, I'll just be a devotee and I'll ignore it. No, then you're not qualified for that then. Forgiveness is something extraordinary, where the Vaishnava has the propensity to just really let something go and just really put it aside and just have that, instead of keeping it within the heart, just releasing it on the basis of understanding of Krishna consciousness, of understanding that ultimately Krishna is behind it, this person needs your mercy, and that even though they have done me something wrong, I will not keep it against them. So that is the Vaishnava platform. So we try to do both these things. We try to understand the situation with a cool head, to understand where a person is coming from, and we also, as far as possible, try to deal with it as a Vaishnava, as a saintly individual, to try to release things that cannot be understood, that cannot be solved any other way. So these things are important. So it is by culture that people have to communicate. So in Kali Yuga, the big trick in Kali Yuga to avoid the quarrel that is inevitable is proper communication. So to learn how to properly deal with one another, so that these issues don't build up so unnecessarily, and to speak about it properly. But it requires a lot of humility. It requires some humility. And it requires actually not just humility, but as we said, it requires some courage. You have to have enough courage to just deal with the situation and to go to someone and tell them honestly what is happening. So therefore we see that the six kind of loving exchanges between the devotees. The exchanges of prasadam, the exchanges of gifts, and then also to inquire confidentially and to reveal one's mind in confidence. That is also an act of kindness that one does to a devotee. So one goes in a very humble mood and reveals to them that somehow there is some disturbance in your consciousness, either by what they have done or what someone else has done. So by trying, that is also part of Vaishnava culture, because these things are important. Otherwise, if we don't deal with it as Vaishnavas, then we will deal with it like cats and dogs. So then we will go back to a material platform and fight it out like materialistic people, which happens because we are not actually Vaishnavas. We are trying to be Vaishnavas, but we regularly fail to be Vaishnavas. And the moment that you fail to be a Vaishnava, then you become something else, isn't it? And we all know what that is. So yes, heated exchanges are sometimes unavoidable, but to deal with issues is important and not just let things lie. Any other questions? Narad Rishi.
According to Vedic culture, spiritual mastery sustains. And we have a spiritual mastery in Krishna. We try to get the arm, and then that's how we maintain. My point is, in this godlessness world, can you give any solid reason where you can tell to the priestess why they are doing this?
Oh, we can't actually. We can't. You see, because the problem is that grihasthas have to give voluntarily when they see that when they are inspired by the saintly qualities of spiritual people. That is what inspires them. And if the grasses are not giving, it means that we are failing. We are failing because we are too lax in our practice. We are too lax with how we spend our time, and we are too much addicted to our own comfort and our own pleasure. Therefore, they are not giving. That is the mentality of the renunciate. Not that we try to force people to give. Like we can make some rule that says everybody has to give 10%, just like in the Christian church. Some Christian churches, if you join, you have to sign a contract. Like in South Africa, there was one church, very big church, very powerful, lots of money. They had so much money. But one of the things is when you join, when you officially become initiated, one could say, their form of initiation, you sign a contract that says 10% of your salary every month has to go to the church. So you can bold it in like that, but that is not Vedic culture. Vedic culture is not that you regulate it by bureaucracy. It has to come by the genuine inspiration of the saintly character of the renounced people. And therefore we see that those devotees in our movement who are greatly saintly by personal character, we see that they always have so much money, so much facility. People are so much willing to give to them. So it's not that the householders are not willing to give. People are willing to give. But people will only give there where they are inspired to give. So that is the actual challenge of those who then take up full-time devotional service. So by legislation or by forcing people or by pointing to culture and say you have to give, that makes bitterness. It causes bitterness in the mind of people. So one has to be very careful about that. And if one is not giving, therefore Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he kept all his temples in debt. He forcibly kept his temples in debt. The moment they had money, he would spend it on something. And he said, why did he keep them in debt? He says, because if you're in debt, it means you'll now be forced to go beg for money to maintain this temple. And because you have to go beg for money, people will only give you money if you have proper character. And therefore you will be forced to maintain proper character because you are in debt. And therefore he says, I will keep all my temples in debt. Otherwise, the moment my temples are not in debt, then the inhabitants of the mud, they will simply eat and sleep and do nothing because they don't have to, because there is no pressure. So therefore we see that that is the actual mentality. Now that's the mentality that the renunciate takes on. The mentality of the householder is then different. He has to then take up, he has to read scripture, and he has to become inspired by understanding that he has to be careful. He has to be careful about becoming selfish, because that is the risk of household life, is that all your energy goes into only maintaining your own family. And therefore one has to give charity. So the householder, he has to become inspired by the understanding that charity is for his benefit. So that's the challenge of the householder, is never to get into this mentality of thinking that he is giving charity, therefore he becomes very magnanimous. No, the householder gives, understanding that it is for my benefit that I give. Because if I do not give, my heart will become as hard as stone, and I will become a selfish individual. So in that way, scripture speaks to both different people from different angles. And we should understand what should be our mood that we absorb. And not that it's not that we do not beat people. Our first priority is to take on the mentality that scripture prescribes for us. So according to our position in the Varnashram system, we have to take up that responsibility and to understand that if someone else is not performing his responsibility, the proper understanding should be that it is due to me not performing my responsibility. So the renunciate, if no one is giving, he has to say, yes, people are not giving because I cannot inspire them to give, because I am too lax in my Krishna consciousness. And if the householder, if he is saying, but there's no one to give to, I want to give charity, but there's no one that is inspiring me, then you have to see, well, it is your fault, because you have not properly supported projects that can generate people that will inspire you. So in that way, we see, for example, how, in any culture you see, for example, brahmacharis, you see that the brahmachari ashram is very important, because they are in one sense just like cows, you see. So a cow is such a simple animal. You just give it some grass and it gives you milk. Just like Prabhupada says here in this purport. You have such an interesting animal. It just takes grass which grows anywhere, everywhere you have grass in the world. And you have this cow, the only thing it requires is just some grass. It just eats grass and then it gives you milk. from grass you can now make cheese and butter and yogurt. It's amazing. That's why it's a miracle thing. If you just had grass, how can you make cheese from grass? No one can do that. But somehow you just put a cow in between and then you can do this amazing thing. But in Kali Yuga, no gratitude. So cows slaughtered. So you milk them their whole life and then you slaughter them. So a brahmachari, for example, is very similar to a cow. Because what do you give him? You put him in a temple building, you just give him some food and you give him a place to sleep. And he works the whole day, supposed to. If he's a proper brahmachari, he works the whole day. And the problem is also, there's certain things that only brahmacharis can do. You can't pay them. So now at temples they have to pay people. Why is that? Because no one is willing. No one is willing to join anymore. And interesting that the same householders who would complain that the temples are paying, these households are the same households who are not willing to send their kids. They don't want their kids to go live in the temple, but at the same time they don't want the temple to pay anyone. So a very interesting situation. So therefore we see many temples, they have to pay people. But even in a temple you can only pay people for certain things, because there are certain things that you cannot pay them to do. For example, the spiritual functions of our society can only be done by someone who has some spiritual inspiration. You cannot pay people to preach. You cannot pay people to go distribute books or pay people to do Harinam on the street, then it doesn't work. It can only work if there is some milk, if there is some love within the heart of the full-time devotees. Therefore the system can work. But therefore we see that these people have to be supported. And if there is no proper people, if that culture is not there, if there is not brahmacharis or brahmacharinis, because nowadays it doesn't depend on gender, it's depending on people who take on full-time devotional service, then the spiritual culture of your community will be weak, and then everyone will suffer. Then the households also will suffer, because then there is no one there now to take care of it. So in that way, to start pointing fingers, it doesn't work, because if proper spiritual culture is maintained, if not maintained, everyone will suffer. And who is to blame? Everyone is to blame. Everyone shares the blame, and everyone shares the pain. That is the consciousness. And the moment we go back to pointing fingers, then we can point fingers like anything. So therefore, we see that how it generally starts. If we look at our history of our spiritual communities that have become successful, it has started with some saintly people that went in and were just willing to take the bullet. We have Chaupati, we have Shiva Ramarash's communities that became greatly successful. But it starts with a group of people who are willing to start being Krishna conscious. A small group of people that start to create a nice spiritual culture that generates trust, and then more and more other people will come, and then the whole thing works. And in the absence of that initial investment of spiritual culture from people who are willing to really be serious about Krishna consciousness, then it never picks up. But we see that at least in the history of Krishna consciousness in America, what we're finding now very interesting is that there was one generation that came and they sacrificed their whole life to build so many temples, raise so much money for all these temples. And we see that now in America, for example, so many temples are there all over the place. But many of them are just dead. Many of them there's nothing happening. Many farm communities, it's sort of nothing's really happening. Temples and nothing is happening. But what we're seeing now is in many places that there's now a new generation of devotees that are taking on these projects and somehow making it alive. Like we have New York City, same, then we have even Tennessee, with Balaram Pran, there's so many other places. Somehow in America something is happening now, where there's like a new generation of devotees who are trying to make it work and seeing. So it's looking very promising, at least in America. But we see that it is difficult, because in a Krishna conscious community, the only lack is not money that is lacking. There's so much money all over the place. Even so many devotees have so many money. The problem is trust. There is no trust, a lack of trust. People do not trust one another. In the community they don't trust one another. The various varnas or various ashrams do not trust one another. The people do not trust the leaders. So this trust is the big lack. There is no trust. And to generate trust can only be generated on the basis of strong character. It is not something that can be artificially made by advertising or by graphic design or by whatever external presentation. It has to come from that real quality. And that is difficult. And at least in Krishna consciousness, or those who take up full-time devotional service, they try. We just try to generate trust. And many of us will fail. Because oftentimes what happens is we try our best and then we're just not spiritually strong enough, and then we can't do it. But even just in making that attempt, at least we get Lord Chaitanya's mercy. So that's all we do. We try our best to inspire trust in others, try our best to ourselves become trustworthy, and then the result is left up to Krishna. And that is really the only thing we can do. Nothing else can be done. But at least, so as far as possible, we all try to perform our own duties. And the more we focus on performing our own duties, the more easy it will be for other people to perform theirs. Okay, 9 o'clock we end here. Grantaraj Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki, Śrīla Prabhupada ki, Nittai Go Premanande.